The cramped interior of the Solstice, a human research vessel, bustled with activity as it navigated the uncharted fringes of space. Its sleek metal corridors echoed with the soft hum of the engines and the occasional clatter of tools and equipment. Mason Ryder, seasoned crew member and engineer, walked alongside his colleague, Dr. Jonah Hayes, as they headed towards the docking bay. "Did you see the specs on the Raylan ship?" Jonah asked, his eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and professional curiosity. "Their technology is leagues beyond ours. Can you imagine what we can learn from them?" Mason, whose experience in space had taught him to temper enthusiasm with caution, shrugged. "I'm more interested in how they handle the fusion reactors. I've heard their energy efficiency is double ours." As they entered the docking bay, the sight that greeted them was unlike anything they had seen before. Suspended in the docking clamps was the Raylan vessel, a sleek, iridescent ship that shimmered with a spectrum of colors, reflecting the lights of the bay. "Impressive, isn't it?" Jonah whispered, almost reverently. Before Mason could reply, the airlock hissed open, and two Raylan twins, Saren and Lyra, stepped onto the ship. Their skin shimmered with a subtle glow, and their large, almond-shaped eyes gave nothing away of their thoughts. Captain Lisa Anders, who had been overseeing the docking procedures, stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Welcome aboard the Solstice. I'm Captain Anders, and this is Mason Ryder, one of our engineers, and Dr. Jonah Hayes, our lead scientist." "Greetings, Captain Anders. I am Saren, and this is my sister Lyra," Saren said, her voice melodic and strangely compelling. "We are here to collaborate and learn from each other." Jonah, unable to contain his enthusiasm, jumped in. "The possibilities are endless. I'm particularly interested in your advancements in biotechnology. Could we start there?" Lyra, the quieter twin, nodded. "We are eager to share. Our biotech has allowed us to advance in ways that might be beneficial to your kind as well." Mason watched the exchange, feeling a mix of skepticism and intrigue. When Saren turned her gaze on him, her eyes seemed to pierce right through him. "Engineer Ryder, we have heard much about human ingenuity in the face of adversity. We hope to observe this firsthand," she said. Mason met her gaze, his reply cautious yet polite. "There's plenty of that around here. Maybe you can start by helping us enhance the efficiency of our reactors." "As you wish," Saren agreed, a slight smile playing on her lips. The group moved towards the engineering section, their steps synchronized. Jonah was bubbling with questions, each one met with thoughtful answers from the twins. Mason, meanwhile, remained observant, his mind racing through the implications of this interspecies collaboration. As they passed through the main corridor, Mason pulled Jonah aside briefly. "Keep your eyes open, Jonah. We don't know their full agenda." Jonah nodded, his face sobering. "I know, but Mason, the potential benefits are too significant to ignore." Mason sighed, knowing Jonah was right. They were on the brink of something potentially groundbreaking, but the unknowns loomed large. As they entered the engineering bay, Mason turned to the twins. "Let's start with the power couplings. I'll show you the setup, and you can tell us how we might improve it." Saren looked pleased, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. "We look forward to it, Engineer Ryder. There is much we can learn from each other." The rest of the crew watched from a distance, their faces a mix of curiosity and caution. As Mason led the way, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, not just to lead, but to bridge two worlds with nothing but uncharted waters between them. The research lab of the Solstice was a flurry of controlled chaos, with scientists and crew members moving about, adjusting equipment and exchanging data. Mason Ryder was in the midst of recalibrating a sensor array when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Dr. Jonah Hayes holding a tablet, his face lit up with excitement. "Look at this, Mason. The preliminary data from the Raylan's biotech scans. It's unlike anything we've processed before," Jonah said, practically shoving the tablet into Mason's hands. Mason glanced at the complex diagrams and exotic formulas on the screen. "Impressive, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We need to understand how their technology interacts with ours." As they discussed the findings, the door to the lab slid open quietly. Saren and Lyra entered, their presence almost ethereal. They moved with a grace that was both fascinating and slightly unnerving. "We hope we are not interrupting, but we noticed an anomaly in the energy outputs from your reactor that we wish to discuss," Lyra said, her voice smooth and even. Jonah, ever the enthusiast, welcomed their input. "Please, join us." "Mason, you were saying something about integrating their tech with ours?" Mason nodded, shifting his attention to the twins. "Yes, let's walk through the reactor operations. I have some concerns about compatibility." The four of them made their way to the engineering deck, where the main reactor hummed with a steady pulse. Mason led them to a large holographic display that outlined the ship's current energy statistics. "Here's where we stand," Mason began, pointing to various points on the holograph. "Our reactors are efficient, but if there's a way to enhance that without risking stability, I'm all ears." Saren stepped forward, her finger tracing a line on the hologram. "Your fusion process could be optimized by recalibrating the magnetic containment field. We have technology that could assist in making the adjustments precise." Mason considered her suggestion, intrigued despite his reservations. "Show me." Using a portable device, Saren interfaced with the ship system. The hologram shifted, displaying new configurations. "By adjusting these parameters, you reduce energy waste significantly." Jonah watched the changes with wide eyes. "That's brilliant. But how stable are these adjustments in the long term?" Lyra responded, "We have tested these configurations extensively on our vessels with no adverse effects for decades." Mason was not one to leap without looking. "I'd like to run some simulations before we make any actual changes." "Safety first." "Of course," Saren agreed. "We appreciate your caution." As they set up for the simulations, another figure approached the group. Captain Lisa Anders had been observing from the sidelines, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Making progress?" she asked, folding her arms. "We might be onto something big here," Jonah replied, unable to keep the enthusiasm from his voice. Captain Anders nodded, then turned to Mason. "Keep me updated, Mason. Every step of the way." "Will do, Captain," Mason assured her. With the captain's departure, the group dived deeper into discussions, Mason and Jonah occasionally exchanging looks of amazement as Saren and Lyra detailed the potential of their technology. They spent hours running simulations, tweaking variables, and discussing theoretical outcomes. As the session drew to a close, Mason wiped the sweat from his brow. "I have to admit, this could change everything for us." Jonah clapped him on the back. "I told you they were onto something special." Lyra smiled, a rare and gentle expression. "We are pleased to assist. It is our hope that this collaboration will be just the beginning." Saren looked around the engineering deck, her eyes lingering on the many tools and gadgets. "Perhaps tomorrow, you could show us more of your ship's capabilities?" "Of course," Mason said, feeling a flicker of excitement himself. "There's plenty more to see." As they left the engineering deck, the ship felt smaller somehow, the universe less vast. The boundaries between their worlds, once seemingly insurmountable, now appeared just a little bit more bridgeable. Days after the promising simulations, the atmosphere aboard the Solstice had subtly shifted. The crew moved with a new energy, spurred by the successful integration of Raylan technology into their systems. In the crew's mess, Mason sat with Jonah and another engineer, Tim Sanders, discussing the next steps. "I have to say, I was skeptical at first, but the efficiency readings don't lie," Tim said, sipping his coffee. "This could cut our fuel use by half." Jonah, always the dreamer, was already looking further ahead. "Imagine what we could do if we applied this tech across the fleet. We're talking about revolutionizing space travel." Mason nodded, but his mind was on other things. "We're moving fast. Let's not get carried away and overlook potential risks." As they debated the pace of technology implementation, Saren and Lyra joined them at the table, trays in hand. The twins seemed more at ease now, their earlier reserve melting into a cautious openness. "We observed your discussions," Saren started, her voice as calm as ever. "It is important to balance enthusiasm with caution. We, too, have learned this over time." Tim looked intrigued. "Was there ever an incident that taught you that?" Lyra exchanged a glance with her sister before responding. "Yes, in our early explorations, rapid application of a new propulsion technique resulted in unforeseen consequences. Unforeseen consequences? Mason echoed, raising an eyebrow. Minor spatial distortions. Nothing we could not correct, but a lesson in humility nonetheless, Saren explained. The group fell silent, mulling over the implications. Mason broke the silence. That's exactly why we need to proceed carefully. Jonah, ever curious, shifted the topic. Aside from technology, what can you tell us about your culture? How do you handle leadership, conflict? Saren smiled slightly. Our leadership is based on consensus, not hierarchy. Conflicts are rare, but are resolved through dialogue and understanding. Sounds ideal, Tim remarked. Human history is a bit messy, eh? The conversation drifted to cultural exchanges, each side sharing stories of their people's customs, celebrations, and daily life. Mason listened, fascinated despite himself, by the stark differences and surprising similarities. After the meal, the group moved to the observation deck, where the vastness of space stretched out before them. Saren stood next to Mason, her gaze fixed on the stars. You seem deep in thought, she said, noticing his introspective mood. Just thinking about all this, Mason gestured vaguely towards the stars. How small it makes you feel. It does at first, Lyra joined in, standing on his other side. But then you realize that it connects us all, more deeply than we might imagine. Jonah, who had been quiet, spoke up. It's amazing, isn't it? Two completely different cultures, working together way out here. Yeah, Mason agreed, a hint of a smile on his face. It's not just about sharing technology, but understanding each other on a fundamental level. As they shared the moment, the barriers of nationality and species seemed less significant. They were, after all explorers, driven by the same desire to learn and understand the unknown. Saren turned to Mason, her expression thoughtful. Perhaps tomorrow, you could show us more of your engineering work? There is much we can learn from each other. Mason nodded. I'd like that. And maybe you can tell me more about Raylan engineering techniques. As they parted ways for the night, Mason felt a sense of camaraderie that went beyond mere cooperation. They were building something new here, something that might one day bridge the gap between their worlds completely. The following morning, Mason prepared the engineering lab for another day of collaboration with the Raylan twins. The lab was abuzz with activity as the crew adjusted settings on the various devices and ran diagnostics to ensure everything was in perfect order. Tim Sanders and Jonah Hayes were deeply engaged in setting up a demonstration of the human propulsion systems when Saren and Lyra arrived. Good morning, Mason greeted them, noticing the curious glances they cast around the bustling lab. Good morning, Mason, Saren replied, her gaze lingering on the equipment. We are eager to see your propulsion systems in operation. Jonah, overhearing the conversation, waved them over. Let me show you our latest adjustments to the ion thrusters. We've made some tweaks based on your feedback. As Jonah led Saren through the specifics, Mason and Lyra hung back, examining a part of the energy converter that the Raylan technology had improved. I'm impressed with your adaptability, Lyra commented as Mason showed her the modified schematics on a digital tablet. It's necessity, Mason replied. Space doesn't forgive much, so we learn to adapt quickly. Their discussion was technical but tinged with an undercurrent of mutual respect and curiosity about each other's methodologies. After a thorough review, Mason suggested they take a break. Care for some coffee? Mason asked, leading Lyra towards the small break area in the corner of the lab. I have read about coffee. It's a stimulant for humans, right? Lyra inquired, her tone one of genuine interest. Exactly, Mason chuckled. Keeps us going. They stood by the coffee machine, the hum of the lab around them. Mason prepared 2 cups, handing one to Lyra, who smelled it cautiously. It has a strong aroma, she noted, taking a small sip and grimacing slightly. And a strong taste. It's an acquired taste for sure, Mason agreed, smiling. They sipped their coffee in companionable silence, watching Jonah enthusiastically explain human engineering concepts to Saren. Mason was about to suggest returning to work when Lyra's hand brushed against his as she reached for a napkin. The contact was light, accidental, but it sparked a charge that surprised them both. Lyra's eyes met Mason's, wide with what he guessed might be the Raylan equivalent of surprise. I didn't mean to, Mason stammered, unsure of himself. Lyra withdrew her hand slowly. It's all right. I am still learning about human customs. Mason nodded, equally flustered. Yeah, we have quite a few. There was a pause, a moment charged with something unspoken. Mason was the first to break it, a tentative step taken in uncharted territory. Lyra, I hope this doesn't come off wrong, but I've really enjoyed working with you. You bring a new perspective that's refreshing. Lyra tilted her head, considering his words. And you, Mason. There is much about humanity that is compelling. Compelled by a sudden impulse, Mason took a step closer. I'm glad to hear that. Their eyes locked, and slowly, almost hesitantly, Mason leaned down. Lyra met him halfway, and their lips touched in a brief, electric kiss that was gentle yet profound. It was a kiss of curiosity, respect, and a burgeoning desire to bridge the gap between two vastly different beings. They pulled apart, a little shocked at their own daring. Mason searched Lyra's face for any sign of regret. I hope that was okay, he said softly. It was unexpected, but not unwelcome, Lyra responded, her voice low. Just then, Saren and Jonah approached, oblivious to the tension. We're making progress with the ion thrusters, Jonah announced with a grin. Ready to see some real fireworks? Mason and Lyra exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. Lead the way, Mason said, his voice steady. As they followed Jonah and Saren back to the workstations, Mason felt a subtle shift in the air. The lab, once just a place of scientific pursuit, now held a new layer of personal significance. Whatever the future held, the boundaries they had crossed today would shape the course of their collaboration, and perhaps something more. The days following the unexpected kiss were filled with a new kind of electricity that seemed to charge every interaction between Mason and Lyra. Even as they returned to their scientific endeavors, a subtle change in their dynamics was palpable to anyone who paid close enough attention. Yet, they maintained a professional facade, focusing on the fusion of Raylan and human technologies. In the engine control room, Tim, Mason, and Jonah were deep into adjusting the reactor settings when Mason decided to bring up the new energy conversion modules they had been discussing with Saren and Lyra. Jonah, Tim, we need to consider integrating the Raylan modules more extensively. Their design might just solve our overheating issue, Mason suggested, adjusting the holographic display to show the thermal outputs. Jonah leaned over the console, analyzing the data with a furrowed brow. You're right, Mason. Their tech handles heat dissipation much more efficiently. But are we ready to go all in with their systems? It's worth the test. Tim, what do you think? Mason asked, looking towards Tim, who was scrutinizing a circuit board. Tim set the board down and walked over. It's a leap, but a calculated one. Let's prototype it in the secondary system and monitor the results closely. As they agreed on the next steps, Saren and Lyra entered, their presence now a regular and welcomed addition to the team. We have reviewed your latest energy consumption data, Lyra began, handing over a tablet with their analysis. If you adjust the flow coefficients as we suggest, you should see a significant increase in efficiency. Mason took the tablet, reviewing the data while Saren explained further refinements. The group gathered around, drawn into the collaborative spirit that had taken root amongst them. The interaction between our two technologies is fascinating, Saren commented as she pointed out a complex algorithm on the screen. I've never seen anything like it, Jonah agreed enthusiastically. It's like our systems were waiting for this synergy. As the technical discussion continued, Mason noticed Lyra standing slightly apart, her gaze lingering on him. Excusing himself from the group, he joined her at the viewport, looking out at the star-studded void. Everything okay? Mason asked, noting the thoughtful expression on her face. Lyra turned to him, her luminescent eyes reflecting the cosmos. I am processing. Not just the work, but us. Mason felt his heart skip a beat. And? What have you processed so far? It is complex. This connection, she paused, searching for the right words. It is unlike anything in my experience. Mine too, Mason admitted, watching a comet trail across the black. But I'm not willing to ignore it. Are you? No, I am not, Lyra replied softly, her hand reaching out to touch his. The simple contact sent a shiver through him. Good, Mason smiled, feeling more assured. Because I think there's something more for us to explore here, beyond the science. Lyra's smile, subtle but genuine, matched his sentiment. Yes, beyond the science. Just then, Tim called out from across the room. Mason, you might want to take a look at this. Reluctantly, Mason and Lyra returned to the group. Tim was pointing to a live feed on the monitor, showing the prototype in action. The initial results were coming in, and they were better than anyone had anticipated. As I see it, this is a breakthrough, Tim said, a wide grin spreading across his face. Let's keep monitoring it. But yeah, this looks promising, Mason agreed, his mind still partly on the conversation with Lyra. As the team celebrated the successful test, Mason felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just professionally but personally. The journey with the Raylan technology was proving to be groundbreaking, and his journey with Lyra was opening up new personal horizons. In the midst of stars and science, something uniquely human was flowering, something driven by emotion and connection. The work would go on, but so would this new exploration between two beings from different worlds, united by curiosity and an emerging affection. The success of the initial tests had everyone on the Solstice feeling a rare mix of excitement and optimism. The team gathered in the main conference room to review the data and discuss broader applications of the Raylan technology within the ship systems. Mason sat at the head of the table, with Jonah and Tim flanking him, while Saren and Lyra presented their findings. As you can see, Lyra began, pointing to a series of graphs on the display screen. The integration of our cooling matrices has reduced thermal output by over 40% without compromising power efficiency. Tim leaned forward, eyes narrowing in concentration as he examined the figures. That's impressive. It's safe to say we've never managed anything close to this with our own tech. Jonah chimed in with his usual enthusiasm. Imagine applying this across all sectors: propulsion, life support, even waste management. We're talking about a complete overhaul of our operational capacities. Mason nodded, feeling a surge of professional pride. It's a big step forward. Saren, Lyra, we owe a lot of this breakthrough to your input and your technology. Saren acknowledged the compliment with a nod. We are pleased to assist. It is our hope that this cooperation continues to yield such beneficial results. The discussion shifted toward potential next steps, including the logistics of implementing these systems fleet-wide. As they debated, Mason's communicator beeped. Excusing himself, he stepped out into the corridor to take the call from Captain Anders. Mason, I just wanted to say good work on managing the integration tests, Captain Anders said, her voice crackling slightly over the line. Keep me posted on any new developments. Will do, Captain. Thanks for the support, Mason replied before ending the call. When he re-entered the conference room, he found the team deep in a technical discussion. Jonah was proposing a bold new experiment involving the ship's navigation systems. If we can adapt the Raylan shielding technology, we might be able to navigate through higher-density asteroid fields at greater speeds, Jonah explained, his eyes alight with possibilities. That would cut travel time significantly on several trade routes, Tim added, tapping calculations into his tablet. Mason resumed his seat, his mind partially on the technical challenges and partially on the personal dynamics that had evolved. He caught Lyra's eye, and a silent understanding passed between them, a shared recognition of the changes unfolding not just around them but also within them. As the meeting wrapped up, Mason suggested, "Let's meet again first thing tomorrow. I think we're on the verge of something even bigger here. And tonight, let's celebrate our progress. Dinner, everyone?" The team agreed enthusiastically, and as they filed out of the conference room, Mason pulled Lyra aside. "Can we talk for a minute?" Lyra nodded, following him to the small garden area on the ship, a quiet space with a view of the stars. "What's on your mind, Mason?" Lyra asked as they sat on a bench beneath the soft light of a bioluminescent plant. "I've been thinking about us, about how this, whatever it is between us, fits into our work here," Mason started, his voice uncertain. Lyra took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about that too. It's new territory for me, for us, but I do not want to ignore it. It feels too important." Mason reached out, taking her hand in his. It feels important to me too. And I know we need to be careful to not let this interfere with our responsibilities. But I also don't want to miss exploring what this could be. Nor do I, Lyra replied, her hand squeezing his. We will find a way, Mason. We must balance our duties with our personal discoveries. They sat in silence for a moment, the vastness of space stretching out before them. It was a reminder of just how small and interconnected their lives had become aboard the Solstice. Let's take this one step at a time, Mason suggested, his voice steady. One step at a time, Lyra agreed, her voice echoing his resolve. As they returned to join the others for dinner, Mason felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had acknowledged the complexities of their situation, but they had also recognized the potential for something profound. Tonight, they would celebrate their professional achievements, but they also celebrated the beginning of a personal journey, one that promised to be as challenging as it was rewarding. The celebratory dinner aboard the Solstice was lively, filled with laughter and animated conversations about the future possibilities of the collaboration. The crew, energized by their recent successes, gathered in the communal dining area, where makeshift decorations lent a festive air to the occasion. Mason sat at one end of the long table, flanked by Jonah and Tim, with Saren and Lyra opposite them. The meal was a mix of human and Raylan dishes, a symbol of their growing partnership. Jonah raised his glass, a sparkle in his eye. To groundbreaking discoveries and new friends, he toasted, and the group echoed his sentiment with raised glasses. As much as I'm thrilled by our work, I'm equally fascinated by your culture, Tim said, turning to Saren. You mentioned your art forms earlier. What are they like? Saren, pleased by the interest, described a form of visual art that used light and shadow in dynamic, flowing sculptures. It is more than decoration. It is a way of understanding the universe around us, she explained. That sounds incredible. Art that literally illuminates, Tim replied, genuinely intrigued. The conversation shifted toward more personal stories. Mason listened, occasionally contributing, but his attention was frequently drawn to Lyra, who shared stories of her home world with a quiet enthusiasm that was captivating. As the dinner wound down, Jonah leaned over to Mason. You seem a bit distracted tonight. Everything okay? Mason glanced at Lyra, then back at Jonah, a slight smile forming. Yeah, everything's more than okay. Just thinking about all the changes happening around us. Jonah followed his gaze and then nodded with understanding. It's exciting, isn't it? And maybe a bit daunting. Both, Mason agreed, but mostly exciting. After dinner, the group moved to the observation deck, where the vastness of space provided a stunning backdrop for further conversation and reflection. Mason found himself beside Lyra, away from the others who were engaged in a lively debate about the physics of wormholes. Lyra, about earlier, Mason started, his voice low. I've been thinking about how this, us, might work. Lyra turned to him, her expression serious but her eyes warm. I have as well. It is uncharted territory, but I believe it is worth exploring. Mason nodded. I do too. I just want to make sure we're careful, that we don't let this interfere with the mission or the crew. That is wise, Lyra agreed. We can set boundaries, ensure that our personal feelings do not overshadow our professional duties. As long as we're on the same page, Mason said, relieved by her response. We are, Mason, Lyra assured him, her hand briefly touching his arm. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Tim, who approached with a grin. Hey, you two, come and settle a debate. We need a tiebreaker on whether a Raylan-style engine could improve maneuverability in an asteroid field. Mason and Lyra joined the group, integrating back into the crew dynamics with ease. The discussion was technical and lively, with opinions flying back and forth. Mason was impressed by Lyra's insights and the way she articulated complex ideas so clearly. As the night drew to a close, Mason felt a profound sense of contentment. The project was progressing brilliantly, and his relationship with Lyra was evolving into something truly special. He knew there were challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he was excited to face them. As they all said goodnight, Mason caught Lyra's eye, and they shared a smile that spoke volumes. Something significant had happened between them, a a promising beginning that was both thrilling and a little daunting. But as he headed back to his quarters, Mason felt ready for whatever came next, confident that together they could handle it. As the Solstice continued its journey through the cosmos, the relationships and technologies aboard the ship had transformed significantly. The final meeting to discuss full-scale integration of Raylan technology into the fleet was scheduled for that morning. Mason, Jonah, and Tim, alongside Saren and Lyra, gathered in the main conference room, each one prepared with notes and projections. Captain Anders opened the meeting, her tone both excited and serious. This is a pivotal moment for us. The success of our collaboration could set a new standard for space exploration. Mason, would you begin by summarizing our findings? Mason stood, clearing his throat. Thanks, Captain. With the Raylan enhancements, we've seen a 40% increase in energy efficiency across the board. Thermal emissions are down, and reactor stability has improved beyond our initial expectations. Jonah jumped in, eager to discuss the implications. What this means is that we can push our engines harder and further. Exploratory missions can go deeper into uncharted space with reduced risk, Tim added. And let's not overlook the potential savings in maintenance and fuel costs. It's going to change how we operate on every level. Saren then presented a detailed report on the integration process, including potential challenges. While the results are promising, we must be cautious about widespread implementation. Each ship in the fleet will need tailored adjustments. Lyra spoke up, addressing potential cultural exchanges that could benefit both species. We also propose an exchange program for engineers and scientists to foster ongoing collaboration and innovation. Captain Anders nodded thoughtfully. That's an excellent idea. Building a bridge between our cultures is just as important as sharing technology. The meeting continued with discussions on logistics, timelines, and resource allocation. As they wrapped up, Captain Anders looked around the room, a smile of satisfaction on her face. This is more than just a technological alliance. It's the beginning of a significant chapter in our history. After the meeting, the crew felt a collective sense of accomplishment. They gathered in the cafeteria for an impromptu celebration, the room buzzing with conversation and laughter. Mason found himself beside Lyra, their earlier conversations about boundaries still fresh in his mind. Looks like we're really doing this, he said, his voice a mix of awe and nervousness. Lyra smiled, her eyes reflecting a similar mix of emotions. Yes, we are. It's a little overwhelming, isn't it? It is. But I can't imagine taking this step with anyone better, Mason admitted, feeling the truth of his words more than ever. As the celebration wound down, Mason and Lyra decided to take a walk along the observation deck. The stars outside seemed to shine brighter than ever, a boundless field of light against the infinite darkness. This feels like the start of something new, doesn't it? Mason mused as they watched a distant galaxy spin slowly in the vast expanse. It does, Lyra agreed. Not just for our technologies, but for us as well. Mason reached for her hand, an action that felt more natural each time. I'm glad you're here, Lyra. With all the changes, having you here makes everything seem possible. Lyra squeezed his hand, her presence comforting and exhilarating all at once. I feel the same, Mason. Whatever challenges we face, facing them together makes all the difference. They stood in silence for a moment, the vastness of space a reminder of the small yet significant place they occupied in the universe. The challenges of integrating two vastly different cultures and technologies seemed daunting, but the potential for growth and understanding was boundless. As they turned to head back, Mason felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be full of challenges, but it was a journey worth taking. And as he glanced at Lyra, her silhouette framed against the backdrop of stars, he knew they were ready for whatever lay ahead. Together, they walked back, their steps in sync, ready to face a new beginning that neither could have imagined when the Solstice first embarked on its mission. The stars above them weren't just points of light. They were beacons guiding them toward a future filled with promise and possibility.